So Matt, we're just talking about Kirby firing camp up. Just heard from him today as the ceremonies begin on the 2023 season, and not a lot of fanfare, as you might expect. But one thing Kirby talked about was how summer and spring have changed over the years, and guys are around the building, around the weight room all spring and summer. There's not a hard line in the sand of guys reporting for fall camp anymore. How do they break that up now? How do they flip that switch on the mentality of these dudes who are just having to, some of the younger guys who maybe don't know what they're getting themselves into?
Yeah, I mean, like you referenced, I mean, the calendar has changed for everybody. It's changed for staff. It's changed for players. I mean, all around. And really, when you look at it, I mean, what these kids do on a daily basis, year over year, is pretty impressive. Really, when you look at the calendar, the time of year they get off is basically May after their spring semester ends. And they get a little bit of time off late June, early July with a discretionary period. But outside of that, I mean, these guys are working. And, you know, I think, I got a cool story on this. So going back to 2021, obviously, first national championship season, May comes around, classes end, and not many players hang around in May. And Devontae Wyatt was a guy. He said, he went to the coaching staff and said, guys, I don't want to go home to Decatur. I don't want to go home to Atlanta. I want to stay here. I want to take some class because when I go home, I don't eat right. I don't work out right. I don't do what I'm supposed to do. And obviously, that was a good sign for that team and that player. But I mean, really, these guys, I mean, they're working all through June, all through July. In July, they're doing a lot of 7-on-7. They're doing a lot of conditioning. They're doing a lot of lifting. And, obviously, spring practice is a big evaluation period for the staff. You get a good idea of where your roster's at, what you got. But, what happened in spring isn't necessarily going to translate over to fall camp because that month of July is huge. And there's a huge opportunity for guys to really develop some strength, maybe start moving a little bit better, reshape their body. So just because a guy was doing something in April doesn't mean he's going to do it in August. And that goes both ways. A guy might have done really well in spring and he might come in August not ready. And then you might have a young guy that puts on 15 pounds in July and looks really, really good. And he's a different player than he was in the spring. So really, I mean, these guys work incredibly hard. They care a lot. They're invested in themselves. They're invested in the program. And I mean, they don't get much time off. And that's not just Georgia. That's everywhere.
Matt, we see the picture behind you there. I don't know if you can see the screen with Cedric Van Pran, and we've had some conversations, you and I over the last couple of months about him. And tell me and what me and you've talked about before, and tell this audience how big a deal that was to get Cedric Van Pran back, and how close was that for him to actually go in the NFL?
Yeah, Cedric was a guy that we felt like we had to get back, and it's not just the fact that Cedric Van Pran's a good player, because he is. He's a really good player. He's, preseason all SEC, all the accolades, all that. But what Cedric Van Pran represents as a person is what separates him. I mean, he's the best leader that I think I've ever seen or been around. Incredibly intelligent, deeply invested in the program. I mean, this guy gives us all every single day, and it's a testament to him. But with Cedric, we were going back and forth with him in January, and the decision date, I think, to declare for the NFL draft was like January 16th or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I mean, those were some late nights. Going back and forth between Kirby, Cedric, all these different parties, because we had to get him back, and we felt like if we could get him back, we're going to have a really good chance this year, just because that's what he means to the team, and the guys care about him, they love him, and we all love him. We wanted Cedric to be there, and ultimately, Cedric came back because he loves Georgia, he loves the fans, he loves his teammates. And, I don't think he felt comfortable leaving before he was ready. So, that was a fun week there in January, kind of before I got out. But obviously, I mean, tremendous person. I mean, I can't say that enough. And obviously, I'm excited to see what he does this year and, down the road in the NFL.
Matt, I've heard Kirby reference this a lot. Coming into camp, he talks about the NCAA has been, good enough to allow us to do walkthroughs. And I mean, I don't know if we want to get in the weeds as far as what the rule is, because I'm sure it's probably more complicated than it should be. But about how much have they been able to be hands-on and walk through and stuff at this point now that they've started, and how much have they been able to get done in terms of being ready to hit the ground running in practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think the coaches have been doing some meetings, but to be honest with you, I mean, there's not a whole lot they can do. It's really up to the players. And what the team gets out of July depends on the kind of people you have on your roster. And if you have a really good roster with really good people like we have, they're going to get a lot out of the month of July. Whereas if you go to some programs around the country where their guys may not be invested, they're not going to get a whole lot out of July, because the onus is on the players, really, because they're doing player-led 7-on-7. So, they're not doing a whole lot of install or stuff like that in July. It's really just focus on conditioning, doing some concepts that have been ingrained in the offense and defense for years. So it's not a whole lot of new material. It's just kind of getting the wheels moving in the right direction so that when camp kicks off, everybody's ready to roll. But really, the month of July and the summer, I mean, it's player driven. It's how bad do they want it? Do they want to get ready for camp? And, hopefully the answer for us is yes, and I think it will be. So
what's a typical – go ahead, Wes.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Kirby mentioned the connection of the team that he hopes to see again. And I think a lot of that comes through Cedric Van Pran, as we spoke about earlier, but it has to be more than just him. And with the new quarterback stepping into that role and all the guys that are back, but, once again, a lot of them leaving for the NFL. How surprised were you this time last year to see that leadership not miss a beat from all those senior leaders who did go to the draft, and just to see SVP and guys like that immediately pick it back up? Because it seems like now there's been enough of a blueprint laid for this team to kind of know what it takes to be player-driven, player leaders, and holding each other accountable.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that we lost a lot of that 2021 roster. I mean, absolutely. And I think coming off of it, there was definitely, I wouldn't say concern, but it was just a question mark, who's going to step up for us? And really, you had guys like Cedric, and you had a few others that, really immediately stepped up and kind of took the reins from the Nakobe Deans of the world and, the Quay Walkers of the world, the Trayvon Walkers, all these different really, really good players that we had that were good leaders. Those were big shoes to fill. And like I said, it was a question who was going to step up, but really, I think it became pretty apparent that we had a good group last spring, 2022. Now, I don't think any of us could have said, yeah, we're going to win the national championship, because you never think about that. It's always the next day. It's the next practice. You don't think about stuff down the road like that. But, I mean, we had a really good group. We still have a really good group. And really it starts with Cedric. But, I mean, you got some good veteran players on that team. I mean, Xavier Truss, Lap McConkey, Kendall Milton. I mean, these are good players, but really, really good people that are good leaders. So it's always a question year over year, season to season. But the way we've recruited and evaluated, that's a big part of the evaluation is the person. And I think that it's become increasingly important in the NIL age and everything that's going on in college sports is you got to get good people. So,
Matt, talk about a typical camp day. So this is the first year you haven't been in a camp, but you've been in every Kirby Smart camp. Talk about a typical camp day. What, you don't have to get into the whole itinerary, but tomorrow's practice for those players. What's tomorrow look like for those guys? Meetings all day. How does that work?
Yeah. It's a lot, I think back in the day, you'd hear about 2-a-days, and I think a lot of people have been through 2-a-days, and, college football and football in general has evolved to where that's not a thing per se, but what you get is walkthroughs in the morning. You get some meetings in the morning, and they kind of break up. They go eat lunch, hang out a little bit, come back for more meetings, probably an hour and a half of meetings, and then it's practice. So you're getting, I don't know how many hours of football a day, but you're getting 2 separate sets of meetings, 2 separate sets of walkthroughs, and then a 2-hour practice or whatever it is. So it's a long day. And, from a personnel standpoint and the role I was in, man, August was fun because you're coming off that July mad sprint recruiting weekend. And, really in August, it's just about kind of evaluating some players, cleaning up the board, getting ready for official visits, getting ready for game days, getting ready for the fall evaluation period, and kind of mapping that out. Who's Kirby going to see? Who's, office coordinator going to see, et cetera. But, really, when you're in that DPP role, you just get to watch practice and you're evaluating the roster. And, it's fun. But when I think about camp, I really break it up into 2 segments. And I'm not saying this is the correct way to look at it. This is always the way I looked at it, is you have pre-scrimmage number 1, and then you have post-scrimmage number 1. And pre-scrimmage number 1, in those first practices, the coaches are just trying to get the guys to, play fast and physical. You're evaluating the roster a little bit, but really you're just trying to create good tempo and intensity in practice to the point that we get to that first scrimmage plays out. And then after that first scrimmage, you're really focused on the depth chart and personnel and, okay, who's actually going to play. But early on, you're installing, and you just want the guys to run and hit. And, it sounds simple, and it really is, because that's the important thing, is getting the guys in the rhythm of practice so that when you're 2 weeks out from that first game, then you can start to hone in on game plan and scheme and situational football and all that stuff. But early on, we're trying to see those guys go play ball because they haven't really played football since April.
So on one hand, it feels like when camp starts, recruiting is just it almost feels like it's done. But I feel like we know enough about Kirby Smart to know that that's not 100% the case. So what does it happen? What is it like with the coaches? Because right now we're looking at a period. I'm not going to ask you about these things specifically because I wouldn't want to put you on the spot. But KJ Bolden's about to make a decision. Nate Frazier's about to make a decision. There's communications going to be ongoing in the coming days. How hard are they working on that during camp? Is it a grind for them to kind of balance that with decisions coming up?
Yeah, I think it's really tough for the coaching staff because you can't just put recruiting down. You got to maintain that level of communication that you've had since last year or however long you've been recruiting the kid. So, you're stacking long days on top of each other, and a lot of it's focused on football and the practice. But, the coaches have to spend at least an hour a day recruiting, whether that's texting, whether that's calling, getting on Zoom, whatever it may be. So the recruiting never goes away. As you said, and especially with Kirby. Kirby puts such an emphasis on recruiting that you can't just neglect it. And, you hear whispers from other programs around the country where it's like, yeah, man, we get to August and our coaches put the phones down. They're focused on ball. They're focused on the season. And rest assured, that is not the case at Georgia. So you recruit 24/7, 365. And that work-life balance is always tough in football. But in August, it is especially tough for those 10 full-time assistant coaches.
Man, give me 2 minutes on Michael Williams. That's a kid that you have obviously evaluated. That was a big deal, flipping him back from USC. But Michael Williams, you saw some flashes into last year, especially in the Ohio State game and some of the things he did. But talk about Michael Williams and where you think he is entering his second fall at University of Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, Michael, I think, is a guy that a lot of people are excited about, and rightfully so. And I think Michael's freshman season was interesting because if you go back and look at that Oregon game, he actually started. First college game, starts as a true freshman, and Tramel Walthour ended up being the starter pretty much all the year. But Michael really came on strong at the end of the year. And what you get with Michael is you get length, you get flexibility, you get power, you get the ability to bend, and he's just a really well-rounded, focused football player. And I remember when he arrived, last year, he's an early enrollee. He gets there in January. And I remember February, he's out there running on the field by himself, just running tempo runs, just sprinting 53 yards one way, taking a 20-second break, and then 53 yards back the other way. And when you have a freshman that's been there for 1 month that's doing that kind of stuff, you have a guy that might have a chance to be pretty good. So I'm excited to see what he does. When you're talking about that defensive end position in the defense, he's really what you're looking for. He's 6'5", he's 260, 265, and plays the run equally as well as he plays the pass. And, that's what Georgia's looking for, because we're never going to sell out for the pass and sacrifice the run game. And it takes a special kind of player to be really well-rounded and be good at both. And I think Michael has the opportunity to do that. So I'm excited to see what he does. But again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but really, really good kid, really good person. And a lot of times that's what makes somebody a good player. So
I went down and shot his commitment video, I guess, in March of his junior year. And I had it for about 2 weeks, and he was like, we're going to put it out. And then the NCAA changed that rule where you could do those June visits and do the summer visits. And I remember Michael calling me going, hey, put that video away for a while. And next thing you know, I thought, man, I'm never going to use that video because he's committed to USC. And so luckily I held on to that video, and you guys were able to flip him back. But I'll never forget, I had a Georgia commitment video of Michael Williams for about 2 weeks. And when the NCAA changed the summer OV rules, obviously that opened him up to take visits. Then he went out to LA. USC hadn't committed for a while. So that was a kind of a behind the scenes crazy part of that recruitment.
Yeah, and I remember that was a tough time for me and everybody involved. Obviously, Michael was somebody we had really prioritized. I mean, he's an in-state kid. He's got all the measurables, all the athletic ability that you want in that position. And he commits to USC. And I remember the day it happened. It's probably 11 p.m. that night. We're in our staff text thread, and it was like batting down the hatch. It's like, it's time to go, not that we had put it in neutral or not that we weren't actively recruiting him, but it was like, whoa, it woke us up, to be honest with you. And obviously, Trey Scott did a great job with that, but really Del McGee kind of
Columbus.
There you go. That Columbus, those roots run deep. So I'm glad it worked out. And obviously, we're glad to have him.